What's going on, everybody? It's Kev with the Screen Squad, and today we're going over the Acolyte episodes 4 through 6. By the way, happy 4th of July. Hope you guys all enjoy your day and be safe out there. A lot of crazies going out, works, barbecues. Just everybody be careful. Don't drink and drive. Play cornhole and have a good day. And remember what we're here celebrating. Now, with that being said, we are going to get right into the Acolyte episode 4, which was a better paced episode of the show. Brought most of the show's major players together in a much bigger way. That includes the much discussed and still secretive The Master, he gave episode 4 a tremendous cliffhanger ending. May still feels all over the place as a character, and killing off Kalnaka after so much buildup is a disappointment in the moment. But there continue to be interesting facets of the Acolyte introduced, like discussion of the Jedi and their dynamic within the Republic power structure at this point in the Star Wars timeline. Ki and Osha have a sweet scene at the episode start when it seems Osha is going to leave, and they speak about meeting up again for a drink down the line once the whole thing's over. And yet it also feels rather flirty, though Jackie seems pretty big on the whole no attachments rule for the Jedi. It remains to be seen if she'd actually allow herself any sort of romantic feelings. A couple issues. Where's Yor's apprentice? She was in the very first scene. Her name's Tassi Loa. She was been absent since her single moment in the pilot episode where they go to arrest Osha. And it seems even more odd to leave her unmentioned. Maybe she's the master, probably not. But the fact that this whole group of Jedi just went to go confront May. Yord's there, but he doesn't bring his apprentice. Weird to me. High Republic book and comic character Vanestra Rowe gets more screen time here, and it's intriguing to see her insist that they should not tell the Council what's occurring. She feels they'd be obliged to inform the Senate, which would lead to a scandal that in turn would inspire fear and mistrust. Jedi are by and large fairly rigid when it comes to the rules, and so it's always good to see someone like Vernestra who operates more in that Qui-Gon Jinn kind of field where she doesn't necessarily feel they need to abide by all the rules. The shape of the Master's costume, coupled with the red lines running through it, are highly reminiscent of Kylo Ren's helmet, particularly after it was fused back together in The Rise of Skywalker. Of course, it turns out the Master is a true Sith. It's possible Kylo is adding in a bit of an homage to someone besides Darth Vader when he put together his outfit. And we know he's Sith because when the mask comes off in the next episode, you find out that this man is someone you know. But anyway, the Jedi are clearly convinced the Sith are a thing of the past, with one suggesting May is working with the Splinter Order, while Vernestra assumes it was a Jedi who was trained her. Given we now know Vernestra is cool with keeping secrets from the Council, we have one more potential avenue, barring the everyone dies possibility, that the Sith's return could be revealed to some by season 10, yet still remain a secret from the Jedi at large by the time of the prequels. Derek Arnold takes over from prequel actor Silas Carson as the younger Ki-Adi-Mundi here. Both a puppeteer and an actor, Arnold has played several other alien roles in Star Wars, including The Force Awakens and Rogue One. And the line of this week's episode is Kamir just kind of jabbing at May when he says, "I'm just curious, how are you going to do it this time? You failed so much already." And the episode ends with the cliffhanger. You get the Jedi standing off with the Master, who brushes Osha aside and then just force pushes them to Kingdom Come. It was kind of crazy. And then it just ends. And I'm not a big cliffhanger guy. So in the moment, it was, to me, I didn't like it. But watching it back and then watching episode 5, I'm like, okay, that saved all the action for a whole action-packed episode 5, which was, as much as I've said I dislike this show, episode 5 kind of hooked me in a little bit with a lot more action, a lot more brutality. You get to see the Sith, if you will, use the full extent of his power, we think. Which leads into the next discussion. Earlier this week, I saw some fans joking around on X and Twitter about how all these unnamed, mostly silent Jedi from episode 4 were almost certainly going to be meeting their end in episode 5 and going full red shirt as the Master unleashes his power, and indeed that was exactly what happened. It initially felt like a rather amusing example of main character plot armor, as Sol, Jeki, and Yord seemed to be the 3 Jedi that were gonna escape this battle alive. Except then suddenly Jeki got killed too, brutally stabbed over and over again by the Master. It was very tragic and sad to be sure, but it certainly felt like that had to be everything for major deaths this episode until Yord got his neck snapped and was taken out too. That one was a huge shock to me, definitely playing against expectations. Our main crew from this show had been Sol, Osha, Jeki, and Yord, and now half of them are gone like that, with, at this point, 3 episodes left in the show. After so much build-up, the Master truly needed to make an impact as a credible threat, and wow, was that the case here. This breathless episode also revealed the identity of Jeki and Yord's murderer. Kamir is the Master. Yes, I know our sleeveless villain says he has no name, but that being the case, I'm sticking with Kamir for the time being until we hear something else. This was pretty much what most viewers had come to expect from the mystery. However, the predictability of this reveal is balanced in a couple of ways. It's happened with 3 episodes to go, so it's not like they were trying to make the Master's identity this huge, big gotcha reveal by the end of the show. On top of that, Kamir's conversation with Osha in the aftermath, incredulously asking her if she truly didn't already suspect deep down that he was her master, feels like an acknowledgement from the writers that if you were paying attention, you could figure it out. Which, for much of its runtime, episode 5 was essentially one prolonged action sequence, like start to finish. Like the episode opens with Osha kind of like coming back to after being pushed out of the way and looking around, and she sees them all fighting in the distance, and all you see is just this red lightsaber blur cutting through dudes, and that was crazy. But yes, the episode essentially was one prolonged action sequence broken into smaller fights, as all the Jedi that gathered on Kofar tried to stop Kamir with none whatsoever, no succession. There were a lot of terrific, very well choreographed beats throughout the many fight sequences, showing the awesome skill of various combatants. Ultimately, Jeki was no match for Kamir, but she gave it her all. I'll give her that. Getting in some rather cool moments, especially when she used Kalnaka's lightsaber to fight with 2 blades, almost reminiscent of Anakin versus Count Dooku in Attack of the Clones. But this was a little bit cooler, if I'm being honest, with the exception of Anakin losing his arm in that fight. But it is what it is. Even before it began cutting down the main cast of the series, Kamir was pulling off some amazing and undeniably impressive moves, including when he stabbed one Jedi through with the saber, then used the Force to pull a second Jedi onto that lightsaber. And it was like a Jason Voorhees stabbing through that couple in Friday the 13th Part 2. If you know, you know. Sol, in turn, got some appropriately badass moments here, from deflecting Kamir's lightsaber as it hurtled through the air, to the intense sequence following Yord's death, where he and Kamir fought without their lightsabers. Almost any pretense of Jedi civility pushed out the window as Sol violently punched and kicked Kamir, to which Kamir finally said the word Sith in this episode, but he did so in an intriguing manner, declaring, "I have no name, but Jedi like you might call me Sith." Which, right there, that's not your name, but I get it. So rather than a full Sith zealot, it sounds like Kamir is more about renouncing the Jedi's teaching than he's also realizing the Sith's ways are the ones he relates to more, as had been established in earlier episodes where he was still posing as a goofy lackey. Kamir truly believes the Jedi overstepped their bounds, declaring he wants the freedom to wield his power the way he'd like. This very much feels hand in hand with the depiction of the witches of Brendok, who also felt the Jedi saw their path as the only correct path, wanting to control the way everyone uses the Force. It's all wonderfully complicated, as Kamir is obviously unhinged and a murderer, but we're now getting multiple examples of how the Jedi's strict systems set in motion others who would see them as the enemy and push back harder. Of course, Khmer bringing up the Sith to Soul now means we'll have to see how and why Soul doesn't pass this information on to others who would spread the word. It feels very unlikely Soul will make it out of this series alive, that's for sure, with Khmer in fact directly warning, they see my face, they all die. Of course, he also stressed his desire to find an acolyte, and now he found May to be a failure in that regard. We know Khmer won't be the last Sith or Sith-esque Force user, of course, so presumably either he or someone who carries on his teachings needs to survive this series in order for any of that to keep moving forward. This episode and how it shook up the entire dynamic has me now highly suspecting that person will end up being Osha, who gets found by Khmer at the end of the episode after she has a little run-in with her sister, who kind of like, all she did was force push her and like knocked her out. And then May kind of takes her lightsaber, or a lightsaber, and cuts her hair so that she resembles Osha more, switches outfits, and then basically goes back to the ship with Soul as they escape. I mean, hell, who knows? It could even be Soul who falls to the dark side, but given how the series began, with these two twins on a different path, it almost only makes sense for it to be Osha. And now that she's on the cusp of learning the full truth about whatever it is Soul and the other Jedi did, yet still yearning to once more use her powers, is ripe for a new master to take her under his wing. The Acolyte felt like it truly delivered on its promise in this episode, using its different era and the unfamiliarity we have with most of these characters to shake things up in a notably thrilling and harrowing way. Exciting and notably cool fight scenes gave way to multiple major deaths, with Jedi falling left and right. The show's newly revealed villain once again underlined the flaws within the Jedi system that have left them vulnerable and caused others to fester a hatred towards them. The Sith's full revenge is still a century away, but we got a powerful and effective preview of what's to come. And that leads in our final episode of this discussion, episode 6. Now, after last week's thrilling, action-packed installment, it made sense that the show would kind of pull it back a little bit and slow things down again, giving us time with the new groupings we were left by the end of episode 5. The results, however, are mixed, with some frustrating aspects to a couple of this week's chapter stories. One is the clear standout offering us a different take on the Sith, or whatever this guy is. I still call him Khmer, so whatever. But whatever he labels himself as is still kind of up in the air as a question. But he is trying to tempt someone to the dark side on a planet that sure looks like Luke Skywalker's home in the sequel trilogy called Octo. We got a lot of great interaction between Osha and Khmer as he made his case for why his way and not the Jedi's is the better path. Khmer underlines what we've seen building throughout the whole show, the Acolyte, noting to Osha that the Jedi insist their way should be the only way to access the Force, to the point that those who leave the Order, like Osha, then believe they lose their connection to the Force. It opens up a lot of possibilities because, as Osha notes, everything Khmer is saying about using emotions like anger and fear to fuel the use of the Force is what she's been taught is the dark side. But is that label too simplistic, or as Khmer calls it, just semantics at that point? The Witches of Brendok were perhaps doing the same thing to access the Force and didn't seem evil, at least not in the way we're used to the Sith being portrayed. So, is the dark side an easy dismissive label the Jedi have come up with for anyone using the Force in a way that isn't their own and goes against how they believe it should be used? Have they gone too far in trying to stop those using the Force in a way that doesn't follow their teachings? This running theme continues to be one of the best parts of the Acolyte, and Osha perhaps comes around to Khmer's thinking. It builds well, really, throughout this entire episode. I wish they would have focused more on this episode, but in a recent interview when asked about Khmer and Osha, the Acolyte showrunner Leslie Headland said Obi-Wan describing Darth Vader as being seduced by the dark side always stuck out to her, and that was very clear here. The Last Jedi had a notable flirtatious element to the interaction between Rey, Kylo Ren, which is not just echoed here but expanded on. Kamir and Osha were not communicating through the Force from far away, but constantly in each other's presence, including her seeing him naked, no less, as he allowed her to sneak up on him while he swam. The revelation that his cortosis helmet acts as a sensory deprivation device, allowing him to fully trust in the Force as he fights, was a terrific touch, setting up the final scene as Osha dons the helmet for herself. The Darth Vader references, we hear her heavy breathing encased within the helmet. It's not subtle, but it is pretty awesome. Another notable is Kamir saying he's seeking the power of two, which has all sorts of implications. First and foremost is the Sith's rule of two. Of course, the Master always has an apprentice. It's not clear how much Kamir knows about the Sith's specific rules in the past, but perhaps he's simply trying to find his apprentice, because that is the way of things. Another intriguing possibility is he's aware of the concept of a Force dyad and wishes to find someone he can form that bond with. When he found Osha in episode 5, he touched her wound as though to heal it. We saw this week she was bandaged up, implying he doesn't have that ability yet. But Kamir may feel like Osha is the person he can forge that bond with, gaining more power for them both in the process. So yeah, if the entire episode had just been the dynamic between Osha and Kamir, it would have been great. Fortunately, sprinkled in, there were a couple of other storylines that were rather shakier, like the scenes with Sol and May with her disguise as Osha were frustrating. The constant bit of Sol trying to explain to the Jedi on Coruscant what exactly happened to his team, only to be cut off, kind of felt belabored. Just say communications are down and be done with it. There was just a lot of circular moments that just kept going round and round, with Basil constantly sniffing the air, suspecting something was off with May. Like, no shit, we know. So just, out her to Sol and be done with it. Meanwhile, we had the Jedi on Coruscant, led by Vernestra, attempting to figure out what happened to Sol. This, too, felt stretched out, given multiple scenes when a couple would have sufficed. And as is often the case with the show, there was a strong idea this time, Sol potentially being set up as the patsy who would be blamed for the whole thing, kind of like the Fall Guy. But that felt poorly told, at least initially. This one I'll give the benefit of the doubt to, since there is still more time in the season, but even the fact that the Jedi were entertaining the idea so suddenly just felt weird, since it wasn't established before as something they'd have a reason to believe. We'll see if Sol's big revelation to May about what happened on Bennak might unwittingly also set himself up as the Fall Guy. Presumably we'll be getting these much delayed details next week, not just because of how the show ended with Sol capturing May, but because Kononada, who directed episode 3, also directs next week's installment, likely signaling it will be another big flashback to what happened that fateful night. Several Jedi traveled to Kofar with Vernestra this time, but you know who also wasn't with them again? Tassilawa, Yord's apprentice. Yord just got offed in the last episode, and yet his apprentice still has no screen time. Doesn't make any sense. Now, Kamir lived on what was assumingly only given an unknown planet label, even as it's clearly meant to evoke Octo. If it is, it looks to be a Porg-free section of Octo, but the new little creatures we saw there were a great inclusion. The moment when two of them froze as Osha walked by, attempting to not be spotted, was a wonderful bit of creature fun, but also just kind of a little bit of Disney being Disney and throwing little creatures in when they don't need to be there. But early episodes of The Acolyte had some pretty weak visuals, but many of the shots on probably Octo were really good and properly cinematic. Especially those where Osha discovered the environment she was now in, cliffs, crashing waves included. It's a fine line in Star Wars over how much you can echo our world and still feel like Star Wars. May factory resetting Pip rode that line, clearly evoking our modern technology in a way that was kind of a bit distracting. I was kind of annoyed with the whole factory reset where she held down 2 buttons and he just reset. Like, it's just a droid, not a fucking PlayStation 2. Whatever. But in the same episode where we see Vernestra use her light whip for the first time, we also see Kamir has made a whip. So it seems Vernestra may factor in as more an important character in the season's end. I'm guessing she was the one who whipped the back of Kamir to give him that nasty scar. I saw some criticisms in the wake of last week's episode that Sol and the other Jedi should have sensed that Khmer was Sithish beforehand, which felt weird given the prequels because you had Darth Sidious, Palpatine, who manipulated Senate for years alongside the Jedi and didn't give them an inkling of knowledge that he was a Sith. So for people to complain about that, like I think there's plenty of other stuff to complain about on the show without touching that, because that one's completely fine. Sith are good at hiding, unless you're Darth Maul and you got all that face stuff going on and you can't really hide. But regardless, to complain about that just seems so redundant, because Palpatine was able to successfully do that for better half of 20 years. And other than that, I liked episode 6. You know, like I said, there were some slow moments. The whole Vernestra thing you could have done with just a couple scenes. Same with Sol and May. A bunch of that could have been reduced to just a couple scenes, and you could have really focused on Khmer and Osha on probably Octo. That was the whole point of that episode. That dynamic between those two was perfect. But there's only 2 episodes left of the show, guys, so here's me being an avid Star Wars fan, hoping for a good conclusion, knowing probably not going to happen. Because once again, Disney is just showing that they don't know how to conclude a Star Wars project properly. They don't. You guys can hate on me for saying that, but it's the truth. I could sit here and say all the good things about the show, but then once I add in a couple bad things, I get ripped apart. Which, whatever. Overall, I'm still not a huge fan of this show. It takes more than a couple flashy episodes to really sink me in. But with 2 episodes left, I'm just hoping that it ends on a better note than it started. That's really all I have for this show, is that I hope it ends better than it began. With that being said, remember, it is the 4th of July, everybody. Have a great holiday. Enjoy your time with your loved ones. Remember what we're here to celebrate. Stay safe. Drive sober, don't drive drunk, and don't mess around with fireworks if you don't know what you're doing. With that being said, this is Kev saying Screen Squad out. Damn.